Okay, so I think most of you know that I'm with UHERO, which is the UH Economic Research Organization. So I just kind of wanted to talk about some of the work I have done in the past with Clay, one project from about, gosh, that was a while ago already, like 7 years ago, in Pu'uwa'awa, thinking about trade-offs when you're doing restoration. In terms of reduced fire risk and but also groundwater recharge. So I just wanted to kind of talk about that because that's kind of a typical, from an economic perspective, a lot of what I do is considering trade-offs and like what's the most cost effective way of doing things like restoration or watershed protection, any kind of environmental management. Really, I do a lot of like how do you optimally pump Pearl Harbor aquifer if we care about both the groundwater, but also like the linked marine systems downstream. So there's a lot of kind of natural resource management, but always kind of in the framework of economics. So, but then I also wanted to kind of share. So UHERO has kind of entered into a partnership with Hawaii Community Foundation since August. After August, to kind of being a data sharing partner and helping them kind of manage and oversee the Maui Strong Fund, just as far as like kind of being the organization that helps collate a lot of the data, like from FEMA and from all of the big organizations, Red Cross, because there's a lot of data out there, but there's not a lot of people that are actually looking at it all at once, and that there's like a kind of a clearinghouse to kind of analyze it all together. So, for example, there's a lot of talk about how many people have left Maui since August, and there's really not a definite number, and it's actually hard to get, and there's a lot of implications, right, in many ways, but including economically. What's happening to the labor force, what's going to happen with tax revenues, all of those things. Like, this data is important. So we're kind of developing mini projects, and that's one, and Clay is a part of this as well. One that I'll talk about, thinking about like how do you convert some of these agricultural lands to other uses, and what are kind of the incentive frameworks that we should be thinking about to have landowners and land managers kind of change from the abandoned ag land model, where that's kind of economically in their best interest currently. So how do you kind of change that incentive structure? Okay, so this is work that we did in 2017. Clay and I were on it was, what was it called? Um, Coastal Seas. So it was
Yeah.
with Tamara Tickton and a bunch of, it was a very interdisciplinary project with economists and botanists, natural resource managers. So Elliot at Pu'uwa'awa, thinking about how to do restoration. So um, given a couple of things, kind of where they're thinking about doing restoration at Pu'uwa'awa, but also kind of given future climate scenarios. And so we looked at a couple of different scenarios, like if we do partial restoration, meaning like they just kind of fix whatever is in their current fences and they restore that area, or if we do like full restoration of the whole, like it was like 6,000 hectares or something. And then what that would mean in terms of increased groundwater recharge, but also landscape flammability. Because if you think about doing restoration, um, kind of where you do it. So that was kind of the question here, is like spatially, if you fix the lowlands, that's where a lot of like the highly flammable grasses are. So that seems good for reducing fire risk. But in the uplands, that's where you get the most groundwater recharge. And so there's always this trade off, like, if we can only restore 1,000 hectares, do we do it below and get like reduced fire risk? Or do we do it above and get more groundwater recharge from that native forest canopy? So economically, we look at the cost of doing all of those things and then try to figure out like where's the optimal place. Like, can we help Elliot figure out where exactly he should be spending money? Because of course money is always limited, and so where you spend it really matters in terms of these ecosystem services like reduced fire risk and groundwater recharge. So these are just kind of a couple of slides to give you the idea of what things looked like. And I just focus here on the reduced flammability rather than the groundwater recharge. But so, for example, in the current climate, most of your benefits are going to be in the lowlands. So in this map, up is actually Mackay, right? So that's the coastline, the jagged area on the top. So, you know, you want more yellow because that means you're decreasing flammability. And so all of that happens in the lowlands because that's mostly fountain grass. And so fixing the lowlands is going to get you more benefit in terms of less fire. But in the future, that area actually moves Malka, right? Because it's getting drier. So the grasses are getting higher, which means restoration should happen in a cost-effective way a little bit higher up. And so that's kind of what you would expect, but we can actually show spatially where that happens. And the nice thing was that we could overlay this with groundwater recharge and kind of identify exactly where you could get kind of the most bang for your buck, right? Where you can get both reduced flammability because you have lower fire risk, but also more groundwater recharge. So it was often kind of something in the middle rather than either lowland or upland. And then we tried to figure out exactly that. What is your, return per dollar? So both for groundwater recharge, but also kind of reduction in flammability, we could calculate per dollar how we could reduce that risk. And so it's kind of the same pattern where in the current climate, all of that kind of benefit is in the lowlands because that's where all the fountain grass is. But as it gets drier and drier, that risk actually starts moving Malka. And so where you should be doing restoration kind of changes over time because your climate is changing. And so we were able in that project, I think, very usefully, and we went to Puuvaava with Elliot, and we had maps, and we were kind of showing people like, this is where you can actually get the most benefit from doing this restoration in terms of water and fire risk. So that was a really fun project, and I think useful as a framework just for thinking about this in general. And then so that was kind of what I've done. I haven't done a lot of work in the economics of fire management, but that was one project. And now kind of moving forward, thinking about this partnership with Hawaii Community Foundation. A lot of what we're thinking about, and this is joint with Clay as well, and some others, McKenna Kaufman, Leah Bremer, others on campus. But this is kind of thinking about, again, how to think about incentivizing different land uses besides this kind of, abandoned ag land model, which is what's happening today. And the reason is because, we're not penalizing leaving lands that way. And we're also not incentivizing the transformation of them either. And so all the big landowners and small have no incentive to kind of switch away from these grassy landscapes. And so, now we're kind of thinking about, and, Clay has been saying that legislators are asking like, okay, we know we have to do something else, but what do we do and how much does it cost? So this is kind of that first step in thinking about how to answer that question is just, can we come up with kind of like the standard strategies that have been, used and thrown out there, roads, fire breaks, green breaks, maybe some kind of agroforest, other types of agriculture. And then can we figure out, and I know this will change spatially, but approximately some kind of average cost of conversion, maybe from different types of lands. And then what are the benefits? So it's really like the costs and benefits of conversion to reduce fire risk. And, the reason we want to do this is because we want to be able to inform policy. We want to, tell legislators and decision makers what should be the penalties if you don't convert, but also what are some incentives to help people to make better decisions. And so those are both like kind of very traditional economic questions, like how do you penalize and how do you incentivize, because these are public goods and public bads. And so that's kind of the framework for thinking about it. Like what would it look like ideally? We would have some probability of wildfire occurrence, which is lower than today, right? So something lower. We know we can't get it to zero, but it can be lower given the type of fire break, what it would cost, and then some additional benefits like, agroforest will have additional biodiversity benefits than, of course, a road. And so we want to kind of lay those out clearly so that when policymakers and decision makers are thinking about how to do this, they have, you know, and this is like the ideal, right? You have a table and you say, here you go, depending on what we're willing to live with in terms of, you know, fire risk, here's a cost and here's what you get for it. It's not easy, but I feel like this is an important step to kind of, you know, start transitioning, having the conversation about transitioning these lands away from their current place. And then I just wanted to, this is the last slide, quickly mention some other, and I'm not working on all of these, but I'm, you know, UHERO, we have all different kinds of, so it's an economic research organization. There's only a couple of people thinking about the environment and kind of natural resources. We have health economists, we have education economists, people that work on public finance. So there's all kinds of these other projects that we're partnering with Hawaii Community Foundation on, including, you know, what are the long-term health implications? What are the long-term education outcomes from survivors of the fire? And then, you know, I'm not even sure that we need this survey, but there's talk about a survey about public trust. So these are some of the things that we're kind of thinking about at UHERO, working on that is related to fire.